right. Well, good morning. Everyone's doing well today and ready to learn. Last Sunday, but the Sunday before last, we got in from Mexico. Got in Saturday afternoon, Sunday school. I came in, and I forgot that every time I come back to Oklahoma, it tries to kill me. And I got this massive sinus migraine in Sunday school. Sunday school, I had to go to the store and get some nasal decongestant spray or whatever. Every time I come to Oklahoma, it hits me like that. The allergies are real bad here. So I've literally not taken allergy meds all year until I came back to Oklahoma, where I supposedly live. So anyway. Well, I think I moved so much week to week that the allergies can't catch me. But they caught me they remembered me here. They were waiting. They were like, yeah, he's back. Let's get him. So anyway, all right, we're going to be in Genesis 3 to get started. And morning, brother. Yep, we start at 9. But that's okay. You're now on camera. That's our guest appearance, and name that pastor for 25 extra points. All right. So we're in Genesis chapter number 3. We're going to talk about counseling. Now, everything we do, we want to be biblical focused and drawn from Scripture, everything we do, because we want the Bible to be preeminent. And we do believe that the Bible is the source of answers. And so when you look at counseling in the Bible, you're not going to find the word counsel and so forth. The Bible we talked about that, about God's counsel. But when you look for an illustration of counsel or counseling, these passages here, the first couple chapters that God interacts with men, are really great illustrations of biblical counseling, because that's what God's doing. And I know He's dealing with their sin, but that's what we do in counseling. Counseling is about identifying where people are yielded to their lusts or have been impacted by sin, and then helping them to navigate how to deal with that in their life. Okay, so when God deals with Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, and then over in chapter 16 with Hagar, these are great passages to understand this idea of counseling and the process of counseling. And we're going to take it right out here of the Scriptures. Okay, so I believe that we're going to break it down for you to where you'll be able to easily see where you are in the counseling process if you'll follow this process. All right, so starting in chapter 3, let's read beginning in verse number 6, and we're going to read down a little bit, and then we're going to stop and kind of go through this portion here. So verse number 6, it says, "And the woman saw that the tree was good for food, it was pleasant to the eyes, a tree to be desired to make one wise. And she took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also to her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together, and made themselves aprons. And they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God amongst the trees." Now here's where the counseling starts. "The Lord God said unto Adam, called unto Adam and said unto him, Where art thou? And he said, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself. And he said, Who told thee thou wast naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I commanded thee, thou shouldest not eat? The Lord God said unto the woman, What is this that thou hast done? And the woman said, The serpent beguiled me. So we see the process beginning here for counseling. And there's kind of 5 steps in the first portion of the counseling process. 5 follow-up steps that go off of this. Total of 9 steps in this process that we're going to look at, but they kind of flow like this: 5 primary and 5 secondary. Step 1, 2, 4, 5, and then we're going to do I want you to really get this process down, because once you understand the process, you'll be able to evaluate where you are. Biggest mistake you'll make is getting ahead of the process and trying to jump ahead, and that's what typically happens. So I'm going to show you where the big danger zones are. So what happens here in this passage is God is questioning Adam and Eve. We're going to talk about questions here this morning a little bit later, but he's questioning, and he's trying to reveal to them what's going on in their life. And I want to say it like that in particular. He's questioning to reveal to them. He already knows, right? But they haven't acknowledged it. They haven't come to declaration of what they're dealing with here. This is actually, and I know this is going to sound really weird, but this is step number 2. Question to reveal. All right? To reveal. Because God knows the heart of every person. And so God already knew where Adam was. God wasn't trying to find out where he was, right? He knew where he was. But Adam wasn't acknowledging what had happened. God already knew they'd taken of the fruit, but Adam wasn't acknowledging it. God already knew all of these things. But he's asking questions so Adam will have to declare and Eve will have to declare what's gone on in this situation. It's important that you understand that the essence of counseling, for the most part, is questions. Questions, 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 questions. The more that you learn to get comfortable with asking questions, the better off you're going to be. And we're going to talk a lot about that here in a few minutes, but I would even recommend that there's a book I read here a while back called Start With Why. It's just about asking questions. The book I mentioned yesterday by Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss is about asking questions. A lot of it's about asking questions. Different books on negotiations and various different things. I'm not recommending that you go to those to learn how to counsel. We're going to take that from the Bible, and we're going to take how to ask questions from the Bible. But I would recommend books like this only to the intent that they teach you how to ask questions. And that's really what you have to learn to be a good biblical counselor, is you have to learn to quit telling and start asking. The tendency that we have is to tell and not ask. So what happens when you tell? Everybody in here's counseled somebody at some point, right? And you go, I think I know what their problem is. And you tell them, I think your problem's whatever, A, B, C, right? And what do? That's not my problem. They argue with you. So then you spend the rest of the time arguing with them to try and convince them that you're right about their problem and they're wrong. That works so well, doesn't it? All right. So stop it. Just quit that. That technique does not work, so stop, all right? That's why you're frustrated with counseling, because you're just like, I know what the problem is, but they won't admit it. And let's be honest about it a second. It's a little arrogant to think you know what everybody's problem is, all right? You may be right and you may be wrong. But when you're counseling, you should never make assumptions. You don't know their heart. Don't assume you know everything about them and every reason they've done things. Quite honestly, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Only God, really. Okay? You may guess right, But don't assume that, all right? So what questions do is they take away assumptions and they give us theories, I guess we might call it, or postulations, postulating an idea, concept, a possibility, okay? And this possibility needs to be tested. This theory needs to be tested. Could it be, this reason or this thought process that's leading to it, or this one, or this one, or this one? And so with questions, you're able to start testing these possible behaviors. And it's important that you view it that way. Test the theory through questions, and if the answers to the questions don't support the theory, throw it away and move on to the next one. But we're often very quick to jump to assumptions, and then once we've declared it, we almost feel the need to defend it. Even if it turns out it may not have been true, here we are still trying to defend our assumption, and they're vigorously trying to oppose it, and that doesn't accomplish anything. So we're going to question to reveal, and this is where God starts, but if we're going to question to reveal, we first have to question to understand. So this is actually step one for us. A step God doesn't need, because God knows and you don't. Don't try and take his place, right? He knows and you don't. So let's talk about listening for a few minutes, and then we're going to get into questions, and then we're going to finish filling out our chart here. Okay, let's talk about listening. Because if we're questioning to understand, we have to get to the place where we know how to listen for the answers. And listening for answers can be quite difficult. The truth is most people don't listen to understand, they listen to respond. Listening to respond will get you in a lot of trouble in your marriage. It'll get you in a lot of trouble in counseling, because you already have your mind made up about what you want to say. You're just waiting for them to pause so you can interject. That's more of an argument than it is a negotiation or help, okay? If you're going to help them, remember you're partnering with them. You're not opposed to them. If you're going to be a partner with them, you need to listen to them, okay? And the worst thing you can do is make an assumption and then try and prove it and never listen to them. Listening matters. How do you listen to understand? How do you listen for the details that you need? Here's some different things. First, you need to listen for key information, and you need to know how to categorize the information. There's 3 areas of information we listen to. We'll label them A, B, and C, because this is a little bit of a formula we use when we do counseling. A is an activating event. Right? So this is something that has happened that they are recognizing as a significant event in the process. Okay? It may have been a catalyst for, in their mind, what happened. Okay? So as you're taking your notes and you're listening to them and writing the various things down, this would be one of those things that you go, okay, to them, this is a significant event, and I need to note this event, because in their mind, this is probably or possibly an activating, instigating situation. B is the belief, or we might say the thought process. The belief or the thought process is how they responded. But more than just how they responded, it's how they think about this issue that produces the response. Does that make sense? In other words, B might be that they got angry, and so they have an anger issue, but we can go deeper than just they got angry. We can go into what produces anger in them, the thought processes that lead to this angry belief that as soon as it comes up, they're even mad in counseling about this particular thing, and you can see it. They're red-faced as they're telling you about this activating event. And if you tell them, I've done this early on in counseling. I had a guy he was in my office and he was just like this, and I said, I think you have an anger problem. Now, this is up in Oregon, okay? And the guy, I didn't ask about anger. I just said, I think you have an anger problem, right? And he stood up, slammed his fist on the table, and he said, I do not have an anger problem. And I'm like, okay, my bad. I was way off there, Like, yep. But you know what happened? Because I didn't understand this quite yet, instead of me questioning until he revealed in his own words, the fact that I declared it made him angry. And it was really the end of our counseling because he was so mad, he was just like off, unhinged. Okay? So I didn't help him even though I was right. So the question is, do you want to be right or do you want to help people? And it's not always the same thing. Okay? So that question to understand, I knew what his thought process was, I knew what the event was, and I knew what his thought process was, and his belief system was that he was responding in anger here, right? But the problem is he didn't know. He didn't perceive his belief system. Anger's a deceiver. Most angry people don't believe they're angry people. They think it's the things that keep happening to them. Right? And so they're blaming this, but they're living this. And as a counselor, you've got to be able to identify what is the belief system. And it may be anger, it may be fear, it may be, but people will even use these words and not correlate them to themselves. Okay? So we're identifying the belief. And then C is the consequence. Consequence for that guy I mentioned was that his wife wanted to leave him. But he didn't believe it was because of anger, even though she was literally telling him it was because of his anger. He believed it was because she kept provoking him. It was her. She kept doing things wrong. She wouldn't do what he said. She wasn't submissive. She wasn't this. She wasn't that. It was not his anger. It was all of these other factors. But he knew the consequence and he knew the activating event. He just wouldn't recognize the belief system, the thought process that was actually causing the problem. So we do this little formula in counseling, A plus B equals C. In other words, your activating event plus your belief system will produce the consequence. Here's the reality, though. A never causes C. B causes C. Right? Two people can have the same event and respond differently and have different outcomes. I have a car accident out here on Western, which is a common occurrence because of the high school across the street. And one person can have that car accident, get out, come screaming at the person in the other car and yell and grab them, pull them out and beat them on the street. And the police come and try and pull them off, and they throw a fist at the police officer and get thrown in jail. And they finally get out, and they go and scream and yell at their wife. And their wife says, that's it, it's final straw, I'm out of here, I'm leaving, goes to work. And he's angry about the car accident, angry about the situation with the police, angry at his wife, and he yells at his boss and he gets fired. And all that happened because he had a car accident. That's what he thinks. Right? If I just hadn't had that car accident, that's what did it. Another person has a car accident, gets out, goes over and says, hey, are you okay? Everyone's safe. Whew, man, God's good. He protected us. And the police get there, and he witnesses to the person. He witnesses the police, goes home and hugs his wife, tells his kids how good God is to protect him, and goes to work and witnesses to people at work, and people get saved, and all because he had a car accident. None of that stuff had really to do with the car accident. It was just an instigating event. It was the belief system that made the difference, right? We were up in Wisconsin a couple weeks ago, and they have a lot of roundabouts in Oshkosh, Wisconsin for no apparent reason. They think they're European, I guess. And the problem with roundabouts is no Americans know how to use them, right? Roundabouts are great. It's just American brains don't understand roundabouts, especially teenage girl brains. And this girl, we were coming through this roundabout, and this girl just plows straight ahead and right into us. And so I stop, and you know how you get that accident, you're like, why was that person so dumb? I mean, you know. And so I get out of the car, and I look back, and it's this teenage girl, and she's alone in the car, and I see her face. It's just like, you know. And I said, I got to be gentle, kind, and, you know. So I walked back. I said, are you okay? And she's crying, I'm so sorry. And I said, it's going to be all right. We're going to be okay. Are you okay? Are you hurt? No, and she wasn't hurt, but she couldn't hardly talk without sobbing and apologizing. And so I said, we got to call the police. They're going to throw me in jail. I'm going to jail. And I just got my license 2 weeks ago. We called the police. We got to get off the road. And I said, now, you need to call your mom or your dad. Who do you need to call? They're going to kill me. And she just was like literally uncontrollable until her mom finally got there and calmed her down. The police officer calmed her down and all that. Here's the thing. That's how most people are. The event just produces emotion and you know, it's not like they sit and go rationally through should I respond. It's just they have a belief system that's here that they just respond with, okay? So we illustrate this sometimes in this way. We call it the bridge to change, all right? And so if you think about a bridge structure here, okay, you've got your support beams and you've got your suspension underneath that's there to, you know, support the bridge. You're going to drive a car across here. I'm not a great artist, okay, so this is a truck. I'm still at like a second grade drawing level, really. So you got this car. If you think about this surface as kind of the activating event, this is what people see. All right? They see what's right there in front of them. They see the thing that happened. Okay? But below the thing that happened here are their beliefs. And their beliefs are actually sustaining their actions here. All right? But nobody stops at the edge of, well, I say nobody, most people don't stop at the edge of a bridge and get out and go down and inspect the pylons and the, you know, support piers and all that type of stuff. We just drive straight across, like, you know, bridges don't fall, you know. But that's how we respond to this incidents also. So there's a belief system under here. We hit that pothole on the bridge and we just react based on our belief system. We don't reevaluate our belief system. We just respond, okay? And below that, supporting those beliefs are our thinking, thoughts. All right? Counseling listens to what is on the surface, but is looking for what is below. So the questions that we ask here, questions to understand, we're going to hear a lot of this, but we're going to be listening for this. And we're looking for this. And then once we hear this, we need to confirm it, right? And then we need to reveal it to them because they're not thinking about this. They're thinking about this. So that the question to understand reveals this to us. And then we question them in a manner to cause them to reveal what it is that's behind the scenes. So they see it for themselves, okay? Because they haven't seen it. We're pulling back the curtains for them. They need to see it, and they need to say it. Because they're not going to argue with themselves. Once they say, the truth is I'm pretty angry all the time. And we start talking about anger and about how they respond to things, and they acknowledge they're angry, then we don't have to convince them that they're angry. We just agree with them. Right? Yeah, you said it yourself. Right? And they're not going to argue with themselves most of the time. Sometimes they do, but most of the time they're not going to argue. So we're going to listen for key information, the activating event details. And then we're going to listen for that belief system, that second layer here. And that's the thought processes. We're listening for those things to come out for understanding, and then we're asking questions to reveal them. We're going to listen for buzzwords. Buzzwords are words that catch your attention. They should catch your attention because they're often they're deflecting words or they're excusing words. Does that make sense? So they're either words that excuse them from taking action or deflect away from them to someone else. All right, things such as, I can't. Have you forgiven them? I can't. It's not possible, right? Can't is a buzzword. You may not want to, and it might be true that you won't, but can't is not true. That makes sense? It's a deflection. I can't. I just can't. So don't ask me to. Right? I could never do that. I could never. Right? Denial there. Don't ask me. How would I know? Don't ask me. That's a deflection. It's excusing myself. It's not my fault. Right? Deflection. Everyone is against me. Deflection. If I had the time, I'd do it. Excuse. I just can't because I don't have the time. You're asking me to do homework? I don't have time to do homework. You know how busy I am? Excuse myself, right? I've done everything that I could. Excuse. Are you getting the concept? So deflections or excuses are buzzwords, and we're looking for that. The don't blame me. It'll never work. I know what you're saying, but it'll never work. I just don't believe it. I had that happen the other day with fella in the homes. He was only here for about 2 weeks. Had issue with depression, and I said, okay, well, this week I want you to start doing a stroke file, and I taught him how to do a stroke file, and he just sat there the whole time. He looked at it. He said, "What's that supposed to do?" I said, "Well, it'll help you start looking for things to be thankful for instead of only looking at the negative things." He goes, that don't work. I said, "Well, it does work. I've seen it work many times, and I just want you to start. It's just simple. It's easy." He said, "There's no way that'll work. I'm not doing it." I said, "Okay, well, here's the deal. If you're going to stay here, you're going to have to do it. It's required homework." He goes, "I ain't doing something that ain't going to work, and I don't believe it'll work." And so we talked more about explaining why it would work and why he needed to do it. And instead, he just decided he wasn't staying because we had stupid ideas. All right. My counseling was over. I mean, there's nothing you can, but what the deal was is it was constant excusing. Either it won't work for me, it doesn't work at all, I don't need to do it, I don't have time to do it, I could never do that. All these excuses, right? Or all these deflections. It's not my fault, it's their fault. Why do I have to do something when they did this, right? And those are the essence of buzzwords, right? Those two categories. And you got to listen for those because buzzwords particularly reveal beliefs. All right? And I'm not going to give you a list of buzzwords to memorize. I just want you to get the concept of the categories. They're excuses and they're deflections, and they come in all kinds of different ways of phrasing it. But they reveal underlying beliefs. And when you hear them, you need to take note of them. Write down that buzzword. Write down that thing. And then as you listen for those things, or you hear other areas of let's say, misconceptions, because you listen for buzzwords, you also listen for misconceptions. I've had so many people say, I know what the Bible says, and they'll quote some verse completely out of context, right? Or they'll give something, I know what you preachers say, and they'll give something, and it's so out of context, right? It's like way off over here in left field, but in their mind, they've already figured out what I'm going to tell them and why it's wrong, right? So they've got misconceptions. Maybe they have misconceptions between each other. And goodness, if you do marriage counseling, one of the hardest things about marriage counseling is, there's two very difficult things about marriage counseling, okay? One is him and the other one's her, all right? And the reality is they really have misconceptions about each other, but they operate on them as if they were absolutely true. They're just like, they're convinced she believes this and she'll never change and she'll never this and he this and he'll never, and they've got these things built up in their mind. It's like the hardest thing for them to do is to set aside their own misconceptions about each other or the circumstance or the situation, right? We jump to conclusions. And so we listen for those misconceptions, and we seek to ask questions for clarification during that time. We listen for biblical error at places where they are wrong about what the Bible teaches and about what they should be doing. We listen for dissonance. When I say dissonance, I mean things that don't fit with the rest of the narrative. There are times in counseling you're listening and they're kind of like, yeah, they're walking down this road, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere there's woo, and you're like, where did that come from? Right? This odd, doesn't fit piece of information. Okay? It does fit. And that's why you've got to listen to them. Don't ignore those things, because they threw it in there for some reason. Right? Listen for dissonance, things that don't seem to fit together. Listen for unknowns. When I say that, I mean things that people are hiding. Remember when God first started talking to Adam and Eve here, he said, where art thou? Right? They were hiding. And it's important you understand this, but not become cynical about it. Most everyone you counsel will be trying to hide something from you. Okay? But it's not always because they're evil. Sometimes it's because they've hidden it from themselves so well, right? They've deceived themselves. Sometimes it's because of the shame that they feel about that circumstance, and they don't even want you to know about it, right? And you're here to help them. And early on in counseling ministry, there were so many times I'm going down this road with somebody, I think we're dealing with what they need to deal with, and all of a sudden this piece of information comes out of nowhere, and I'm like, whoa. We're going down the wrong road. They were hiding this over here, and I didn't even see the trail, and we got to go back to that road. Now we got to go down that road, and it's just the unknowns. It's things that have been hidden, things that have been concealed, maybe we might say, and again, sometimes purposely and sometimes not purposely. Especially in marriage counseling, there are a lot of things. You say there's always three stories in marriage counseling: his story, her story, and the truth. And they're seldom, the same. It's his perspective. It's her perspective. And I always love in marriage counseling in particular when they ascribe motive to an action of their spouse, right? And that's very common, right? So he did this because he doesn't love me, right? Like, that's always the thing we jump to. It's because he doesn't love me. If he loved me, he would put his socks in the hamper, and there's no other question. There's literally no other way to look at it. It's not that he's lazy. He just hates me, all right? And that's the only possible motive. And so we jump to motive. And so, but anyway, we got to listen for those things that are unknown, those things that have been kind of concealed. And then I said this yesterday, but listen again. And this is why I recommended recording your session, and then just go back and re-listen to it, because sometimes, and I've always had this experience when you do a second session or third session, whatever it is, the next session, where I'll have questions about things that they had said before, and I'll just ask them, could you clarify? You said such and such about this. Could you clarify this? But if you had it recorded, you would be able to just go back and listen to it, and for verification of what they said and how they said it, and words matter, right? All right, so this listening to questions is a big thing, and you're listening to understand. That's the first step. Listening to understand. Getting clarifications. Asking. But in your first series of asking, you never use the word why. You're going to ask questions for clarification on specifics and actions, events and actions, all right? But you don't really want to, in this phase, you don't want to get into motives as much, okay? When you get into motives, you're going to be in the second phase. Right? And why is a motive question. It's asking for motive, but it also engages emotion. As long in the process as you can, you want to avoid the emotion side of it, because emotions cloud judgment and clarity. And so you want to get as much clarity about the event and the responses and the behaviors and the wheres and the whats and what fors and all that as you can, without engaging the motive or the emotional side, okay? And so look at the questions God asks here. Let's look specifically at these questions. And we're going to I want you to interact with me here. The first question in verse number 9, where art thou? Where art thou? What is this question? It's a where question, right? But if you were using it in a counseling scenario, situation, you're sitting with somebody, how might you use this question? I'm not talking about using it explicitly in the same, where I'm not saying sit in front of your counselee and say, where art thou? Right? They're going to be like, I'm in your office. What's wrong with you? Right? But we know what he's asking, okay, in that sense. He's asking for that declaration of their situation, if you will, or how we would use it. So we might ask a question, where are you in this circumstance, in this situation? Does that make sense? They've come in and they've told you about this thing that happened. Okay, well, where are you in this process of dealing with this? What is that going to tell us? Well, their response is going to tell us, hey, I'm at a dead end. I have no idea what to do. I'm here to get instruction. Or their response might be, to be honest with you, I've already gotten paperwork to file for divorce. Now I know where I'm at. Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, sometimes we assume things about their circumstance or where we think they should be, and they're not where we think they are. They're way over there. But if we don't ask, we're not going to know. You get what I'm saying? So I'm asking, where are you in this circumstance? Where are you in this situation? Look at the next question. And I want you guys to chime in here and say, so the next question, this is an interesting one. Who told thee that thou wast naked? What do you think that question is? I want input from you guys. I know what I think about it, but I want input from you. This is a class. What's some way that you could use that question in counseling other than talking about nakedness, all right? There you go. All right. And I put it like this. Who's influenced you? Who's influencing you right now? You talking to some friends about this? You talking to parents? You talking to, moms? Yeah, go ahead.
Would it not also be an indication of whether or not they're feeling conviction, or how are they responding to conviction?
Somewhat, yes. But when we're using it in the counseling, the question here at first is what influences are you allowing in your life right now? That's really the emphasis of this question if we were applying it to a regular counseling. And it's important you get that, because I've had people say, well, I read this book. Oh, what book was that? And now I know why? Because that book is informing how they think about this, right? Or that friend that they've talked to is informing how they think. And so now I have a follow-up to that. What did they tell you? Oh, you read that book? Well, what did you learn from it? Now I get an insight into what's behind their thinking process. And that's really what we're looking for. What's behind their thinking process? So who told you were naked? Who's influencing you here, right? Who's guiding your thinking and directing your thinking in this matter? These are great questions. All right. Another thing about that particular question is this technique, and there's a technique called reflective listening or mirroring, okay? And it's where you would take a particular word or particular statement and you would essentially state it back to the person to get them to respond more, right? So Eve says, well, we realized we were naked. And he said, you're naked? You were naked? Right? Who told you were naked? But also just, really? You're naked? What's going on with that, right? And that repeating that word back to her made her then give more explanation. And so that mirroring or reflective listening that God does here draws more out, okay? And it's a good technique, but when you use it, but use it sparingly. And I say that because people get weird about, why are you just repeating stuff back to me? Okay? It's assume people are smart and not dumb. It's a good assumption, right? Until they prove otherwise. And then proceed with what's revealed, all right? But using that technique sparingly in your conversation, when there's particularly an odd thing that's like, well, this is new information, and I need more explanation, but they're just kind of like dropped it here, like maybe reflect it back a little bit in the form of a question, okay? All right, look at the next question. Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I commanded thee thou shouldest not eat? So what are we asking here? What kind of question are we asking? What's a way we might phrase this in a counseling session? I know this is specific, but... Okay, so that's a way we might ask. So have you done something you know the Bible says not to do? Right? That's a good use of that question. What are some other ways we could do it?
What have you done to try to remedy the situation?
Okay. Yeah. What are you trying to do? What have you done to try and fix it? Right? Yeah. What have you done? What have you been doing about this problem? It's a good question. Yep. Okay. Good question. Where did this start? Where did it come? What caused it? Yeah. All right. Yep. Say again. Yeah. Yeah, and so you're going to use both closed and open-ended questions at times. Most of your closed-ended questions need to be in the question to reveal portion, right, which is where God is. So what he's doing is questions to reveal here. When you're gathering information, you want to leave the questions as open as possible, because you really want them, I know this is going to sound like I really don't want them to just ramble, right? but you really do want them to talk as much as possible, because the more they talk, the more likely they are to reveal the stuff that you need to hear. It's just that you have to learn how to tell the difference between the stuff that's irrelevant and the stuff that matters. Okay, and so that's an exercise in patience and deliberate, understanding there. But yeah, okay. So all of those are good, right? How have you responded to this circumstance? How did you respond to this situation? Okay. All right. Let's look at the next question, verse number 13. What is this thou hast done? What is it you've done here, right? How else could we ask that? Thank you. Huh? Okay, well, let's not use that one. Or the one before that. All right, any other questions?
Is it a recognition of consequences?
Okay, yes. Well, you could ask that, but then also what you said, what did you do here? Which of these consequences that you're seeing are the result of what you did, how you've responded? Do you recognize the connection between your response and the consequences here? Right? But you're asking, not telling. Right? Do you see any connection between the things that happened and the way you responded?
Basically asking what are the results of what you've done.
Yeah. Okay. Again, I'm not trying to make up questions per se. I'm trying to hear. What we're trying to do is just say, this is the essence of what God is doing. He's asking questions that are somewhat leading, aren't they? When we get to the revealing portion, these questions are a bit leading, but there's a reason. Now, God has already come to an understanding. He already understood what they did and why. And so he's trying to not get his understanding. He's trying to get them to see it and acknowledge it. And the connection there. So he's asking somewhat leading questions, but notice all of the way all of these questions begin. Where in verse number 9, who in verse number 10, hast thou, did you eat of the tree, right? Verse number 13, what? Notice there's no whys here. Who, what, when, where, how? Okay, those are the questions he's asking in chapter number 3. These are questions to reveal. But you get into chapter number 4, and he asks a why question. Look at chapter number 4 and verse number 6. And it says, the Lord said unto Cain, why art thou wroth, and why is thy countenance fallen? It's interesting here what happens. First, the why art thou wroth, how could we rephrase that question? Okay, why are you angry? What's causing you to be angry? Okay, why do you feel the way you feel? So we're now questioning the motive and the emotion, right? But here's another thing that we're doing, is we're labeling the emotion. Labeling is an important part of this because it's going to matter as we get into the depth of counseling, and it helps to clarify in their mind what it is they're feeling. Okay? But don't do it in a statement manner, do it in a question manner. And so you might say it like this. It seems to me that you're angry. Is that true? Now that's a question. But it labels the emotion. Instead of, hey, you're angry, right? That they might argue with. But they say, no, I'm not angry. Say, okay, well, it just seemed that way to me. I didn't say you were. I was trying to ask, is that how you're feeling? How would you label your emotions right now? How would you explain them? What would you call how you're feeling right now? We're getting a label for it. Why? Why do we need a label for it? Huh? Then we can deal with it directly. That's right, with the belief system there. Okay, and it's their acknowledgement of that label or their declaration of that label. Okay. By the way, sometimes people say, no, I'm not angry, I'm hurt. Okay. Now I know how they're perceiving it. Because their perception of what they're feeling matters. Because I'm not going to be able to deal with their feeling in that sense unless they're aware of and acknowledging of. And I might deal with anger a bit different than I would deal with hurt. Right? But also, I might continue to ask, so you're hurt. How do you typically respond when you're hurt? Well, I get angry. Okay. Right? You understand what I'm saying? But we're doing this with questions. We're not just telling them. We're asking these things. So we might seek at this point, and this is what God does here. Why art thou wroth? Why is thy countenance fallen? And again, remember, God already knows the heart. We don't. So don't assume. Investigate. Is this right? We might say it like this. The countenance. What is the countenance? It's their persona, right? How they're presenting themselves. Okay, so we might say, your body language indicates you're upset. Is that true? Right? I see you've got your jaw clenched. Are you angry? Are you tense? Are you stressed out? Are you? Right? These are questions, and they're not accusations, but it's observations. And we're to make it an observation. We're asking them about the observation. So, but this labeling portion is an important part. Okay, verse number 7 of chapter 4. If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. But here's that question. If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? How could we use this question? What might we say in counseling that would be similar to this question?
See the correlation between your actions and the cause.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. But see, now that's a statement. You've gotten ahead of this process. I understand why you said it, and it's not an inappropriate statement. It's just not at the right place in the counseling session. I'm going to tell you where to put it. Okay? It's a good question. Are you tired of trying it this way? Is it? Brother Hayes used to ask us, he'd say, how's that worked out for you? How's that working for you? I hated that question. But that's what this question is. How's that working for you? Right? Anybody else? Yeah? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's right. That's the question. Right? Okay. You might even go as far as to say, what could you do to fix this situation? What do you think? What do you think you need to do to fix this? Quite honestly, sometimes we miss an opportunity. I mentioned this yesterday when I'm doing counseling with a pastor, a missionary. A lot of times I'll say, if someone in your church came and had this problem, what would you tell them to do? Right? What counsel would you give someone else about this situation? How would you fix this situation? Not what have you done so far, but how do you think someone would fix this situation? Now we get a little bit of insight into where they're, and quite frankly, here's what I find. A lot of people actually know how they ought to be responding, but they're not. But when they say how they ought to have responded, say, well, that's interesting. Why aren't you responding that way then? Right? What's prevented you from doing that? Okay. Now, you understand, we've moved into that motive area a little bit, but also we're getting them to engage with us about the solution, because I don't know about y'all, and I do counsel people that are not Christians, because we counsel people that the addictions ministry and so forth. But the majority of people I counsel are Christians. Right? And they've heard many messages, they've read Scripture about what they ought to be doing. They're just not doing it, right? So they really know what they ought to do. They're just not doing it. So that's one of the questions. Okay, let's look at. Let's see. There's more questions here. In verse number 9, where is Abel thy brother? That's an interesting question. How could you use a question like that in counseling? How would you maybe use it? Yeah. Okay. Who has been affected by your behavior here? That's a good question. All right.
Where have your responses led you? You responded this way.
What's the result of this? What's the result of what you've done so far, right? Okay.
I mean, would the goal of this point of questioning be to begin to reveal to them the acceptance of responsibility?
That's a big part of it. Yeah. Because we're going to be coming into this phase here in just a moment, but the more that they're cognizant of their role in the situation, the less that they're excusing themselves or deflecting away from themselves, the better we are when we go to the next stage of counseling. Right? So we've got to get them to the place where there's cognition of the situation, responsibility for the situation, direction. The results are because of how I responded, not because of what happened. We're revealing this. Okay? And then, so we might even say something like, hey, what do you think brought you to this point? Right? Where does that come from? And where do you see the situation going from here? Right? In verse number 9 there, where's Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? Right? He was a little bit sarcastic back there. But where do you think this is going, Cain? Where do you think we're going from here? Right? You haven't responded well so far. Where do you think it's going from here? Okay. So all along here, we're asking these revealing questions. So we're asking questions to understand, and we're forming theories about these things, and then we're going to test our theories by asking questions to reveal. And if I'm asking questions to reveal and my theory's wrong, I just discard it and go to the next theory until I find a theory that's right. And I don't make assumptions about them. I just keep testing theories until we find the right theory. Does that make sense? All right. So this is step 1 and 2 in the counseling process. Question to understand, question to reveal. This could take how long? It could take weeks. It could take multiple sessions. It might be that you don't get to what's revealed for several sessions. And I will tell you this, there's sometimes when I've counseled folks that specifically have had real severe sexual traumas, it can take multiple weeks to get to the source, to the issue, okay? Because their shame and all of that clouds things, and it's hard for them to see, how to kind of their response in the situation. Remember this, that life isn't about what happens to you, it's about how you respond. So I cannot counsel away what happened to them. All I can do is counsel them about their response and the result of that. Okay? And so it's part of that process. And I'm not talking about blaming them. I'm not asking them to take the blame for something that happened to them. Okay? But I am asking them to take responsibility for how they've responded to it. And that's a different thing. But if they never take responsibility for their response, then the event will always have power over them. Okay? So there's a freedom that comes from acknowledging that that person that did this no longer has power over me, and the event does no longer have power over me. And so that freedom is when they come to that acknowledgement of my ability to respond before God. Okay? So that questioning may take several sessions, but don't get ahead of it. The typical thing that we do is we try and jump from 1, I think I understand, all the way down to 5. Say, what's number 5? Well, then we'll talk about that in our next session, all right? And so let's take a 10-minute break.